Sliders. They seem to be the most difficult thing to do in front-end web development. A lot of times when we first get started, we go ahead and download a bunch of packages to just do a slider. And that's cool, but we think it's super complicated. So what I'm gonna do in this video is I'm gonna dive deep and show you how to create a vanilla slider, not in just JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, but in vanilla React. There's a ton of tutorials on how to just do a slider in vanilla JavaScript, but how do you do it in just plain old vanilla React, create a slider from scratch? Again, what people do is download, use a lot of things called Swiper.js and a lot of other packages which are available for React, which is totally okay. But it's good to know how to create some basic sliders so you don't need to rely on these packages. But also stay tuned because in the description below, I did create this as a package. You can download it off NPM as well, which you can see later in the video or in the description below. But I want to show you how to actually do this from scratch. So let's just jump in and let's figure this out. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to ruin your day by actually having you create this slider. And it's not as complicated as you think. So let's just get started. So here's a demo. If you guys like front-end development, React, JavaScript, CSS, Next.js, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It's just a slide from left to right. There are 3 photos and, just next, previous, and that's it. So just your basic slider in React. So now let's go ahead and start from scratch. So you could just go ahead and do downloading, just your basic React or your basic Next.js. And what I have installed is Sass. I did npm i Sass just to make sure I have Sass components. If you look here, I went ahead and I have some mixins, which these are just to make my life look a little easier. They're not going to conflict with the tutorial at all. I have some CSS reset, some basic stuff, and some basic global. Nothing that's too crazy. There's nothing going on there that you really need to know about. What we're going to have here is just, I have here the pages, which is my main page where I'm going to have the slider. And so let's just go ahead and do that. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and let's just go ahead and delete what I have here and let's see this load. So I'm just going to start from scratch, have my basic stuff just to show you what we're going to be doing. All right, so let's go ahead and, all right, so we have nothing on the page now, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is we have in components, we have a slider.js and you want to go to create a slider.module.scss. And then you want to import that in import styles from the .slider.module. And I have that here. I have some stuff already created, but we're going to go ahead and do it from scratch. We're going to start all over. I've imported some stuff from the mixin, which is nothing but breakpoints. And that's it. So here we are from scratch. Okay. So what you want to do is once we create the basic skeleton of the tutorial, so you have a slider.js, you have a slider module and components. In your main file, you're going to show you want to import slider from component slider and just paste the slider right there. So you have your own, React component from the slider that has nothing yet. So we're going to close this page out. And now we're going to go ahead and get started and create the slider. Okay, so this is going to be broken up into 2 parts. The CSS, which I think it's important to show. Some people skip this, but I'll just go ahead and show it. And then the JavaScript, and the React essentials to actually create everything. Okay, so let's first create the slider. All right, the slider is going to be nothing but basic, basic stuff, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a div that, and again, I'm using CSS modules, so bear with me on that. And all you have to do is just do, instead of using global CSS, it's imported. You could see another tutorial on CSS modules and stuff like that in another video. So we want to go ahead and create your first thing, which is just a slider, right? So .slider. And then here I've created a slider right here, an element, okay? Then we're going to create div.styles.slides. So we're just going to have one master parent and then a parent inside there for the slides. And then inside here, we're going to have div.styles.slide. Oh, did I do this right? Nah. This is what's hard about the CSS modules, that it doesn't, the autofill is not as great. So now we have a slide, one slide right there. And then inside of there, we're going to put an image. All right. And we'll do images. I have here one called pic.jpg and there it is. So again, there's no CSS applied. So then we just want to create the arrows. So what that's going to be is going to be adjacent to the slides, right? The slides are right here, and down here we're going to put the arrows. So we'll do one called div styles.arrow, And I did spell that wrong. And we'll do another one. Whoops, should be styles. And that's it. So we have one called arrow. Now I'm going to have it called next, right? So in order to do this, we have to combine CSS module classes, and this is how we do that. So we got that one, and now we're going to create another one called next. And I'm going to copy and paste this over inside of here. I'm going to make one called Prev, standing for previous, okay? So now we have the core skeleton of a slider, okay? Now we're going to go ahead and apply the CSS. So let's go ahead and do that now, all right? So the first thing is we have a slider, and what I'm going to do is just nothing here. I'm just going to apply some basic height. I just want to straighten this out a little bit here. So we're going to do height calc 100 VH minus 80 PX. And then we'll do overflow hidden because we don't want nothing to go outside of that. And what do we have here happening? Slider. What do we have? Import styles. Height. Oh, all right. So it looks like we have to have that space there. All right. So I'm creating crazy this stuff that you see here. So it can't hide it attached. So it looks like negative 80 px, but it's 100 VH minus. So this was just so I can create some space. You can go full screen if you want. I just wanted to create some spacing here. Now we have the dot slides parent, right? So you have one slider, just a parent component. In there we have the slides, which will hold all the slides. And then this is not really gonna have anything except we want to go 100%. We just want it to expand. And if you see here, if I go border 1px solid red, so you can see what's happening. You could see the red here. You could see what's being held, right? So it's all the parent containers, that's all. Now we want to create the slide. So each slide, what we want to do is, because I'm going to have it slide from left to right, all we need to do is have all of the slides outside of the container with the translate 100%, and the active one is the one that's going to have 0%. So I'll show you, and everything could be positioned to absolute. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You'll find like a lot of tutorials on how to do this, and all of them seem like there's not one way to do this, so just, bear with anyway. This is the way I do, and I find it helpful. So we're just going to position absolute. Oh, let's actually make the dot slide, and we're going to just do position absolute for all the slides, right? Top 0, left 0. We're just positioning everything absolute with 100%, height 100%. Now the Z index we'll review later, but right now we're just gonna have the base slides all negative because we're gonna need to slide the active one over the other one. So we want all the slides to be negative. All right, so now I'm gonna leave this for now, and I'm gonna jump to the image, right? So just let's apply to, because now we have slide, and then we have one image inside there. So let's apply the object fit. So we don't use background image a lot because of SEO purposes. So what we'll do here is object fit cover with 100%, height 100%, and look at that. So now we've just did cover. So that fixed all the problems that we were facing. Now I'm going to apply a couple of things that happen a lot, which is you don't see it just yet, but I'm going to apply pointer events because it like allows people to drag the photo, and I don't like the way it looks. And then the user select, we're going to do none, which is, it stops the selection of this kind of thing. I'll show you that like a little later, but because there's no content there on top, so you don't see it as much. But these are important to stop the dragging. Okay, so now we have the slider because we just don't have multiple slides there. All right, great. Now let's also make sure we have our arrows. The arrows are kind of fun. I'm gonna skip some of this in the video, but again, they're just positioned absolute left to right. We have an SVG that is encoded as base 64 just so that it's like a little easier to paste in the CSS. So what we're going to do here in slides, it's going to be adjacent to the slides. Let's just double check that. Slides, yeah. So it's so we'll do arrow, and I have some CSS here, copy and paste, but basically it is going to be positioned absolute, top 50%, translate negative 50%. So just going up and down. I could show you here what it looks like. So border 1px solid red, just to see everything we have here. So you see it's positioned right here, left, height, width, and then this I'm going to be using background size, and I'm going to be using the app prev here, right? So This is the SCSS. So this is saying if it's arrow and prev, let's put it to the left. Background position, put the background image, and you see it right there, the left arrow. And this is just a base64 converted SVG of an arrow that you could just paste in there as a background image. And then we're going to do the same thing, which is basically the same, but just flipped arrow to the right. And this is just basic CSS, and the right is flush to the right, the prev is flush to the left, and that's it. And we're good, right? Nothing's happening. We just have the core skeleton of a slider. Basic CSS, nothing crazy. And that's all. I don't think there's much to cover here. That's pretty easy. Just it's the SVG is just positioned as a background image here, centered. And then you can make it larger or smaller, depending on, you can use a breakpoint. So I have here like a breakpoint as tablet, and then I just make it like a little larger. And that's all. So we're pretty much done with our CSS. Not quite, because we still do just have when it's active, next, and pre. So now the idea here is that we have our active slide, which you have to label as active. All the other slides, we want them to be positioned off screen. And then I'll take off the overflow hidden right now so we can see it. You shouldn't see them. And then as you click, you want them to move in. So let's go ahead and complete that right now. So what you could do is, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an object of the slides first. So that we can map them. Okay, so what we'll do here is do const slide images. I have just a basic JSON like object here, and I have slide images, and inside of those is an array of objects of image, and then the URL of the image, and I'm going to map over that. So we could just add to the JSON and just map over this and create the slide. So what we'll do here is we'll take this slide, right? We want to duplicate this based on how many things we just want to map over that array. So it's called slide images. So slide images.map, which is the map method. Slide index, so the slide is going to represent the item. Index is going to represent the index, right? What it is inside of there. And then that should be about it. So we want to return this. And then bring it down here, and oops, we want to, yes, return. Oops, what do we have here? What's missing here? Slide, return that. Then we want to do, sometimes all these like braces drive me crazy, but we're just mapping over the array and just presenting the slide each and just returning it, right? And now what we want to do here is, instead of manually showing the image, what we want to do is just say use the slide, this guy dot image. Okay, so let's get that in there, slide dot image. And so now we have everything. We do need a key. So we're going to say key equals index. Whenever you map over, you got to make sure you have a key. Okay, so now you can't see anything because they're positioned absolute. And they're all positioned absolute, right? But now what we want to do is we want to make sure that all of them are moved over to the right, and only the active is the one that shows. Okay, so let's first just see what this looks like. So what we'll do here is we're gonna go back. So we have everything here. We just need to reorder them. So we'll go to the slide and we'll say transform translate X 100%. What that's going to do, now you won't be able to see it, but see, I removed the overflow. And if you go to the right, now all of them are sitting here on top of each other. So you can't see them. But once we put the overflow hidden, you won't be able to go to the right. But I just wanted to show you that there they are, because the idea is that you're going to click and they're going to slide in one by one. But what we want is we want to have the active one. We always want that to be translate X0. We want that to show always. That's the one that we want to slide in and always be available. So now what we want to do is, the idea is that we want to be able to notify ourselves through the JavaScript in here, which is active, which one's previous, and which one's next. And we're going to do all that using state. So the first thing is just to show you what we're going to do here is, let's just put an active class so you can see what happens. Okay, so let's allow for multiple CSS modules here, and I'm going to put one called styles.active. All right, we'll move this over here. All right, now I don't have an active class yet, so we'll do it right here below. So we'll say and.active. We want to do is just make sure we have display block, transform, translates x 0. So there it is. So now we see the active one going over here, and then we want to do z index 1. But if you see what happened is they all moved over because right now the active is applied to everything. So what we need is this to dynamically say which one's active. But I just want to show you now that we added the active, that's what we want. The next thing is we want to add CSS for .next, display block, and then we want to add one for Prev, which we haven't added these elements just yet, but I'll show you how to do them now. So we want the previous one to go to the left, so translate 100% that way. Active is this way. The one is the previous one that passed is that way. So we'll do transform, translate x, and we'll do negative 100%. So now we have sort of the the CSS that we need, but we just need to start applying this. So now we need to do this dynamically. Okay, so here we are. Now we have all that time that we just did, however long, was just the core skeleton of this. So let's go ahead and start. I'm just trying to create some room here. So now we took off the active class, and now you see everything back to square one. So what we want to do first is we want to be able to identify, we want to be able to add classes to the active, next, and previous. Now realize what it is that there's an array. So arrays always start with 0, and that we always have to do like a -1 whenever we do slide length things. So I'll show you what we're gonna do. So first of all, let's get the active one. How do we know which one is active? Well, first let's create a use state called active slide to make sure that so we have imported use state. Let's call const. Let's create like a state for active slide. So what is the active slide? What index is the active slide? Oh, I did this wrong. Let's do this. Set active slide equals use state, and by default it should be 0, which is the first image. Okay, so then we're going to create a function that we're going to be saying which one is active. Then we also want to create, we want to know what the total slide length is. So we'll say let total slides. And then after it reads it, we want to say that the total slides equals the slide images dot length. Just so now we have an active slide of 0, we have a total slide images, which is 3 in this case. Okay. Now we're going to go and create the function. But first what we want to do is tell this which one's active. Which one should be active? The first one by 0 is the one that's active because that's the first one. So what we're going to do here is, this is just a ternary conditional statement here. So we're going to say, and then it's going to apply a CSS module on the ternary if. So it's going to be active if index equals active slide, and active slide, the initial state is 0. So meaning if index equals 0, then what we want to do is we just want to go ahead and apply styles.active to it. So there we have it, right? So we already said here that the active slide is 0. And now what it's doing, if you inspect here, right away, it's adding the styles.slide. It's adding the slide, it's adding the active, the active class to that. Now you see if we change this to 1, the second image became active first, and we're not going to do what we're trying to do. We want to be able to iterate over through that and have them slide through. So by default, we say 0. So that's great. Let me just take one look over the slide. Okay, great. Yeah, everything looks great. So now we know which one's active. All right. The next thing is we want to say which one is next and which one's previous. We just want to be able to have here an indication on here which one is next. All right. So well, we know that the next one is always going to be, I'm going to duplicate this. It's always going to be active slide plus 1. It's the one that comes right after, right? So if it's index equals active slide plus 1, that is going to be the styles.next. And then the next one is going to be the previous, so it's going to be styles.active slide -1, right? Because that is, if it's the active slide is 0, the previous is there. If it's 2, the previous is the one before. So it's always -1, and that's going to be .prev. Okay, so if we refresh this and we hit inspect, you'll see here, you should see here, the active and the next is there. Now, what you don't see is the previous. And the reason is because we've said if the active slide is minus and the active slide is 0, so -0 is negative, is the negative one. So we need to have some conditional statements for when you get towards the end and when you're in the beginning. We need to readjust which ones become next. So if you're one before the next one is going to be the first one. It sort of cycles and that kind of thing. So there's kind of two conditional things. So one is, we don't have a previous, right? Because we're at the 0. So what is the previous technically when you're at 0? It's the last one. That one is the one that it's the last one item. Because if you go back from the first one, you need to kind of go to the end, right? It's like if I'm at the first slide, I want to go back here, the last slide is what should come. So what we want to say here is, if we are, I'm just writing this out here. So if we're at the active slide and the active slide is 0, meaning we're at the first spot. And then the index equals the total slides -1, meaning that it's a total size -1, meaning it's a total length -1 because the array starts at 0. So really the total is 3 -1, so 2. So we want to say, in that case, let's add the styles.prev. So basically, if the active slide is 0, then the previous class is the last one. So if we refresh here and we do an inspect here, you could see here that, where are we? Active slides. Right here, that now that we're at the active is the first one, the next one is next, and the last one is previous. Okay, so we're just trying to get the classes to act. All we want is to have the right classes where they need to be. Then the last thing is, if we are one before the end, or if we get to the end, basically what's next at the end? The first one, because we're creating a loop. So if you're at the last slide, the next one has to become, the first one really becomes next. So we want to say, if the active slide, okay, if the active slide equals total slides -1, meaning the active slide, the index, or whatever we identified as the active slide, is the last one, which is total slides -1. It's the total length -1 because of the array. And the index equals 0, we want to add styles.next. So then now we want to say the 0 is the one that should have the next one. The index is the one that should have the styles.next. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It's a little confusing, but essentially what we're trying to say is, if you're in the beginning, the previous one should be the last one. And if you're at the end, you already have all the previous, but now you don't have a next to loop. The next one has to be the first one. So it's just two kind of like strange conditionals that need to be applied. Now with these classes, all we need to do is iterate through the active slide. So now in order to make this happen, we just want to create a function that on click keeps the active slide going, but we are going to have some conditional things for when it's towards the end and when it's all the way at the beginning for the previous and next. Okay, so here we are. So we're going to create one function, and now we're going to call it on click, right, of the, I'm going to create one function on click of both. So we're going to say on click, we're going to create a function called slide, but I'm going to pass a parameter called next so that I don't have to make multiple functions for the next one and the previous. It's going to be one function. And then on this one, on the arrow click, we're going to do slide prev. Okay, so basically on click, right, nothing's happening. The slide, it doesn't have the thing, right, so nothing's happening here. But now we want to go ahead and create that function. So let's go up here to the top and let's start creating that function. So we're going to say function slide, and then I'm going to pass in whatever parameter. I'm just calling it action here, whatever you want to call it, it's fine. Now you can see here, because if we do like an alert, just to make sure everything is working, you see it's, if you click here, it's fine. All right. So now what we want to do is say if now, because I want to create this one function, I have to have an if and say, okay, if the action equals next, that means, you know, the next thing is passed. So again, this is just so I don't have to create two different functions. Now let's do all of this content. Now we want the active slide to move up. Okay. So essentially what we want to do is set the active slide to whatever was previous plus 1. Okay. This is essentially what we're trying to do. Okay. So we want to do set active slide. And again, this is, you could do set active slide plus 1, but there is some talk about how you want to make sure you use the previous state so that you can update it correctly. So all this is just saying, just add 1 to whatever the previous state of it was, but it's basically just set active slide to the state plus 1. All right. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And let's click the right. Okay. So you see here, it's moving. Now you go to the end, you saw what happened there. So we're at first, second, third, and now first, second, third, and now it kept going, right? Because there's nothing there. So because it just keeps adding 1. So now we want to do we want to fix this up so that when you get at the end, the next one doesn't become 3, 4, and it resets to the 0, right? It resets to the index, to the first thing. So first we want to say, we only want this to actively go plus 1 if you're not at the end. So we have to, so I'm going to cut this out first and say, I want to make sure I know that you're not at the end yet. So if active slide is less than, and we said that the end is always going to be total slides. We have that array length minus 1. Okay. That's how you know you're at the end. You're not at the end. Here we want to say, okay, now only if you're not at the end, keep going. So if we refresh this, we're going, and now it's not doing anything because this conditional statement is saying, no, don't go anymore. What we wanted to do now is actually set the active slide back to 0. If you're at the end, the next one is the first one, right? And because if an array starts with 0, it's really 0. So we'll do else, and we're going to set active slide to 0. So we'll refresh this, boom, 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 and now it's starting over, right? So the right is working now, right? So that's it. That's so pretty simple, right? All we're doing is that, but that capture of like making sure you're not towards the end is really, really important. So, but again, it's just working. Now, previous is not working. We have nothing going on, but the right is just looping itself, right? Let's refresh this. Okay. Now we want to do the same thing for the previous. Okay, so now we want to go down. So everything is working smooth for that. Now let's say else if the action equals prev, right? You're just saying, hey, if the click has a parameter called previous, let's do this. So we want to do the same thing. So first we want to say is set the active slide to the active slide, whatever it was, minus 1, right? We're just doing the opposite. We're just saying, hey, previous always got to go down, right? Now, we do have a problem, right? Because right here, if we start at the beginning, if we go back, the minus 1 is -1, -2, right? And that doesn't exist in the array. The array is 0, 1, 2. So we only want it to go negative if it's not in the beginning. Basically, we want to make sure that it's not in the beginning. And if it is, then the one previous, which one has to be? It has to be the last one. So we want to say, hey, listen, if you are, if the active slide, right, is 0, right, you're at the beginning, then what needs to happen is the active slide needs to be the last one, because if you're here, right, if you go previous, it's going to be the last one in the list. So we're going to say set active slide to which one is that? Total slides. And what did we say the last one is? Total slides -1. It's always -1 just because of the array of that starts with 0. So we're saying do that. So if you go here, see this works. If you go, if you go back, it works, right? So now it's going, because look, 1, 2, 3. Now let's refresh. If you go back from here, that's the third one. So it's going back correctly. But now we want to say, if you're not at the beginning, just do the thing, just do the basic function, which is like, just go back 1. So this is basically it, right? So if we go here back, 1, Now we're just going backwards. We're just minusing. But all of these things are picking up where it's at. So we're really just plussing 1, minus 1, but only doing particular conditionals when we're at the end, and particular conditionals when we're at the beginning. So hey, you know, when you're at the end, make sure the previous is the first one. And when you're at the beginning, make sure the previous is the last one. All right. And that's it. So this slide is basically working. We just don't have any transition, right? So this is great. So now what you can do is you can add an opacity. So now we just need to just add a simple transition, and that's basically going to do it. And that's the whole slide. So what we want to do here is if we go here and do transition, all 0.7s or something like that, we'll do it ease in, out, and let's see, oops. Let's save this. Let's make sure this went through. Oh yeah. Yes, it's working. And now if we go back, so we just have a loop, and that's pretty much it. You have a basic slider in vanilla React. It's super simple, and that's it. Now, if you want to do opacity, you don't even need to do the 100%. You could keep everything basically. Let me see if we can do that now off the top. But yeah, so let's just get rid of the arrow border. And that's it. It's a responsive slider. And then you do want to get rid of the overflow. You do want to add the overflow hidden. So we'll add that. Okay. And now what we can do is for the transform, what we'll do here is say, hey, we won't want all of these, the moving left and right. What we want is just it to be opacity 0. Right, so everything goes away, and the active can just be opacity 1. Now, if we did this right, there it is, basic slider. And if you're just doing a fade, there's also a lot of stuff you probably need to do in the function, because we're really just doing the opacity, and that's basically it. You have a basic slider. So these are the core sliders. If you look up like Swiper.js and all these things, you'll see that you'll just have a fade, and you also have this like left and right. Parallax and things like that do get like a little tricky, and that is one of the things I'm diving into in vanilla. But vanilla React slider is pretty easy. It's all you need to do. Now, I did promise you that if you do want some of these, I did create packages for them on npm at uiworkspace. So and then you could just do npm I at uiworkspace /sliders, and you can go to the website. There's a bunch of sliders, and these two are there. And just go check it out, guys, at uiworkspace.com. I hope you guys like this tutorial, and I hope you guys realize how not too difficult it is to create basic React, basic sliders in React from scratch, just using vanilla React without any packages. But again, if you do want the package, go to UI Workspace. Guys, I'll see you guys in the next video.